Hello students, welcome back. Today we are going to discuss human reproduction part 5. The topic is follicular atresia. The process of oogenesis means the formation of ovum begins in the ovaries of the female fetus before birth. A female child is born with as many as 2 million primary follicles containing primary oocytes. So what is meant by a primary follicle? Primary oocyte, which are surrounded by granulosa cells or follicular cells, are called as the primary follicles. So these are how many are present? 2 million or maybe 20 million primary follicles are present in a female child at the time of birth. Most of these primary follicles degenerates during childhood and by puberty, means sexual maturity. Only about 4 lakhs are left in both the ovaries. Of these 4 lakhs of primary follicles, only about 450 primary follicles are mature, one per month, and are released from the ovary during whole reproductive life of a female. The rest of the primary follicles undergo regression and disappear due to death and disposal by phagocytes during the reproductive years of the females. This is referred as follicular atresia. The differences between spermatogenesis and oogenesis. The differences between spermatogenesis and oogenesis as follows here. So we are already knows that the definitions of spermatozoa here, the ninth point. Spermatogenesis is defined as the production of sperms and oogenesis is defined as production of ovum. And where these two processes, spermatogenesis and oogenesis, occurs. So spermatogenesis occurs in seminiferous tubules of testis, and oogenesis occurs in the ovaries. And when it begins, so spermatogenesis begins at puberty after sexual maturity, whereas oogenesis begins before birth in the fetus during intrauterine life itself. The oogenesis will start in female fetus. Now, mobility or motility of these gametes formed during spermatogenesis and oogenesis. So, spermatogenesis, the production of sperms. Sperms are movable, whereas production of ovum, oogenesis, ovum is immovable. And already we know the processes of this spermatogenesis and oogenesis. So polar bodies, that is another differentiation. So during spermatogenesis, polar bodies does not produced, whereas during oogenesis, polar bodies are produced when primary oocyte undergo first meiosis, and it is unequal division and it produces a large secondary oocyte and a small first polar body. So polar bodies are produced during oogenesis. And the number of gametes formed during spermatogenesis and oogenesis are, there are 4 haploid gametes or spermatozoa are produced during spermatogenesis, whereas only one haploid ovum are produced during oogenesis. So duration of these growth phases in the spermatogenesis and oogenesis, the duration is very less time in spermatogenesis, but whereas it takes a long duration in oogenesis. So metamorphosis or maybe transforming. So that means metamorphosis, the transforming from one form to the another form. So that will observed during spermatogenesis, that is a spermiogenesis, that process we will call as, that is transforming the spermatids into spermatozoa, that we can observe in the spermatogenesis. But such type of metamorphosis or transforming we cannot observe in the oogenesis. Reserve food. So the sperms cannot store any food in the cell, but they will get the nourishment from seminal plasma. Whereas in oogenesis, the ovum consists reserve food that we will call as yolk. It is present in ova, but the reserve food material yolk is absent in the spermatogenesis or maybe in the sperms. Then the next concept is menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle is defined as the cyclic process of releasing of an ovum from Graafian follicle or ovarian follicle once in 28 days is called menstrual cycle. So here mensum is it means month, and this menstrual cycle begins at puberty, sexual maturity at the age of 10 to 15 years, and this menstrual cycle continues till the age of 45 to 55 years. The phases in menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle consists of four phases. They are menstrual phase, proliferative phase, ovulatory phase, secretory phase. Menstrual phase. In a 28 days menstrual cycle, the menses takes place on cycle days 3 to 5. The production of LH, luteinizing hormone, from the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland is considerably reduced. The withdrawal of this hormone causes degeneration of the corpus luteum, and therefore progesterone production is reduced. Now let's see the diagram. So in this diagram, we can observe the different events which are mentioned in different levels in the diagram. So now first at the bottom we can observe the events which occur during it occurs in uterus, and next we can observe that levels of hormones in ovary, and also we can observe here the events in the ovary during menstrual cycle, and also we can observe the levels of pituitary hormones. Now let's see during this menstrual phase when it takes place. The menstrual phase is takes place in initial days, that is initial in that out of 28 days of menstrual cycle, first 3 to 5 days, this region, first 3 to 5 days, this part we will call as menstrual phase. So what happens at this phase? During this menstrual phase, pituitary gland pituitary gland reduces its production of this LH. Luteinizing hormone production is reduced. And we already studied the function of this luteinizing hormone during oogenesis. This luteinizing hormone acts on corpus luteum. It acts on corpus luteum and to produce a hormone called as progesterone. So that means when this LH production is reduces, then it causes the degeneration of corpus luteum that we can observe in ovarian events here. The yellow body, ruptured follicles are converted into yellow bodies called as the corpus luteum. This corpus luteum is degenerated due to the reduction of the production of this luteinizing hormone by pituitary gland. They are degenerate. When this corpus luteum is degenerates, it reduces the production of progesterone. The production of estrogens is also reduced. The endometrium of the uterus breaks down and menstruation begins. The cells of endometrium secretions, blood, and the unfertilized ovum constitutes the menstrual flow. So let's see the diagram. Till now, we are already discussed that these first 5 days we are called as the menstrual phase, and during this phase LH production is very low. As a result, the corpus luteum is degenerates and reduces the production of progesterone that we discussed. So that is LH production is reduced. That LH is produced by the pituitary gland. Now, and same way, the estrogens, that is ovarian hormone, the estrogen levels are also reduces during this menstrual flow initially. Here, the estrel, blue color one, estrogen, the estrogen levels is also reduces during menstruation phase. So then what happens during this menstruation phase? So endometrium of the uterus breaks down. Endometrium is nothing but inner uh, muscle of the uterus. Already we studied that uterus consists the 3 layers of muscles. So endometrium, mesometrium, perimetrium. Endometrium of uterus, the cells of that endometrium break down and menstruation begins. Now, what is present in that menstrual flow? Menstrual flow consists endometrium secretions. The secretions are released due to the breakdown of the cells of the endometrium, and due to rupturing of these endometrial cells, it bleeds. That means blood is also present in the menstrual flow, and unfertilized. That means fertilization does not place when menstrual cycle is occurring. That indicates that there is no fertilization in the female body. So that's why unfertilized ovum is also present in the menstrual flow. Proliferative phase. It is also known as follicular phase. This phase is usually includes cycle days 6 to 13 or 14 in a 28 days cycle. The follicle stimulating hormone FSH secreted by the anterior lobe of pituitary gland stimulates the ovarian follicles to secrete estrogen. Estrogen stimulates the production of proliferation of the endometrium of the uterine wall. The endometrium becomes thicker by rapid cell multiplications, and this is accompanied by an increase of uterine glands and blood vessels. So let's observe the proliferative phase in the diagram. So now the first already we discussed here, the first 1 day to 5th day, this region we are called as the menstruation phase. Now the proliferative phase, it is a start from 6th day to 13 or maybe 14 day up to here. From 6th day to this 13th day, it is this region is considered as proliferative phase. So when we observe this phase, then once again we need to comparing that ovarian events as well as ovarian hormone levels as well as pituitary hormone levels during this proliferative phase. So now the follicular stimulating hormone, it is a gonadotropin hormone produced by the pituitary gland. It stimulates the ovarian follicles, the follicles present in the ovary. So these are the follicles in the ovary, and these follicles are stimulated by the follicle stimulating hormone, and they starts to grow, undergo the multiplication to increase their number. So they starts to grow, and the growing follicles starts to production of the estrogen. Already we have studied the development of ova after completion of oogenesis. So primary follicle, secondary follicle, and tertiary follicle, and matured follicle we will call as the Graphian follicle. So these developments are takes place during proliferative phase in the menstrual cycle. Now, when the growing follicles are starts to secrete estrogen, that estrogen hormone helpful for the proliferation of endometrium, that is innermost uterine muscle. So proliferation means it undergo repeated cell divisions and increases the uterine glands as well as blood vessels within the endometrium. Third phase, ovulatory phase. Both luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone attain a peak level in the middle of a cycle about 14th day. So rapid secretion of LH induces rupturing of Graphian follicle and thereby release of ovum. In human, secondary oocyte is released. This process is called ovulation. So during ovulatory phase, ovulation is takes place. That means releasing of secondary oocyte or ovum is takes place on 14th day. So ovulatory very short duration, that is only on this 14th day 14th day the ovulation is takes place. And what is the conditions in the endometrium as well as conditions of these hormone levels during ovulatory phase. So during ovulatory phase, the pituitary hormones are in peak level, particularly luteinizing hormone. So the rapid secretion of LH and its in high level of this luteinizing hormone we will call it as LH surge. This LH surge, that means peak levels of luteinizing hormone is initiates the rupturing of ovarian follicle or maybe Graafian follicle to release the secondary oocyte, not a ovum in humans. The secondary oocyte is converted into ovum after immediate contact with the sperm. When sperm contact with secondary oocyte, it initiates the completion of second meiosis. Then it become ovum and it produces the another polar body that we are discussed during oogenesis. So LH surge is responsible for the ovulation, releasing of the secondary oocyte from Graafian follicle, and rupturing of Graafian follicle is due to the high level of luteinizing hormone produced by pituitary gland. The last phase, that is a luteal phase, it is also called as a secretory phase. This phase usually includes cycle days 15 to 28 days cycle. The luteinizing hormone is secreted by anterior lobe of pituitary gland, and this LH causes the ovulation, and the remaining cells of ovarian follicles are stimulated by LH to develop corpus luteum. The corpus luteum secretes a large amount of progesterone. Now let's see that. So in this diagram, already previous slide we discussed the 14th day ovulation is takes place due to the production of this LH. The high level of this LH causes the ovulation, and the luteal phase, that is secretory phase, it is occurs from 15th day to end, that is 28 days of this cycle. Last this entire part 15, this entire 15 to 28 days, this region we will call as secretory phase. Now what happens during this secretory phase? So ovulation is takes place on 14th day due to rupturing of Graafian follicle. Here that is the first step. If fertilization is takes place, if fertilization is takes place, the ruptured Graafian follicles are converted into yellow colored bodies called as corpus luteum. Development will takes place, and this developed corpus luteum produces the progesterone to maintain the pregnancy. If not, if fertilization does not takes place, then The ruptured Graafian follicles are converted into a white color bodies called as corpus albicans. So, if fertilization takes place, it form as a corpus luteum. If fertilization fails, it converts into corpus albicans. So let's see the schematic representation of entire menstrual cycle. So here the cycle is given. So first 1 to 5 days. So the first 1 to 5 days that part is considered as menstrual phase, and from 6 to 13, 6 to 13 that we will called as the proliferative phase, and this 14th phase we will called as ovulatory phase. Ovulation is takes place at this, and from 15 to 28, 15 to 28, this we will called as the secretory phase or maybe luteal phase. That representation is given clearly. So during menstrual phase, the menstrual flow is takes place. It constitutes blood and contents of the broken endometrial cells and unfertilized ovum. And proliferative phase, during this proliferation of endometrial cells will takes place. That means multiplication of cells, glands as well as blood vessels present in the endometrium is takes place during proliferative phase. And when come to the ovulatory phase, the ovulation is takes place on the 14th day of the menstrual cycle. It is happen due to the high level of LH that causes the rupturing the Graafian follicle. And 15 to 28 days, that is secretory phase or luteal phase. Here it depends on the fertilization. If fertilization is takes place, the ruptured Graafian follicles are converted into yellow colored bodies called as the corpus luteum, and it is helpful for the production of progesterone to maintain the pregnancy. If fertilization does not take place, then the Graafian follicle, ruptured Graafian follicles are converts into the corpus albicans. The hormonal control of menstrual cycle. So we are already discussed during menstrual cycle. So the hormones produced by the pituitary gland as well as the ovarian hormones are helpful for controlling this menstrual cycle. Let's see. GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, also called gonadotropin releasing factor, GnRF, is secreted by the hypothalamus of the brain, which stimulates the anterior pituitary gland to release gonadotropins, that is follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. So follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the ovarian follicles to produce estrogens during proliferative phase to increase the number of multiplications in endometrium. Luteinizing hormone stimulates the corpus luteum of the ovary to secrete progesterone if fertilization takes place. Now, menstrual phase is caused by the reduction of progesterone and estrogen. These points are very essential in this hormonal control. So menstrual phase is caused by the reduction, that means less production of progesterone and estrogen causes menstrual phase. That means menses is due to the less production of progesterone and estrogen. Proliferative phase is caused by increased production of estrogen and increased production of luteinizing hormone causes ovulation, releasing of ovum or secondary oocyte from ruptured Graafian follicle. And secretory phase or luteal phase is caused by the increased production of progesterone. Excess or increased production of progesterone caused the secretory phase. Increased LH causes ovulation. Increased proliferative phase causes proliferative phase. Increased estrogen causes proliferative phase, and reduced or decreased the production of progesterone and estrogen leads to menses. So this is the a simple schematic representation of this entire menstrual cycle and its hormone relation. Menarche. Menarche is defined as the beginning or commencement of menstruation at puberty. Sexual maturity is called menarche. So simply we can call it as the first menstruation is called as menarche. So it marks the beginning of reproductive life of a woman. It normally occurs between 11 to 13 years. That is puberty in females. Menopause. Menopause is described at about the age of 50 to 55 years. The ovulation stops and the menstrual cycle is permanently ceased or discontinued. This is known as menopause. After menopause, the female loses the ability to reproduce due to lack of production of ovum. Menopause also brings about a hormonal imbalance, particularly decreased estrogen level in the body. Menopause is also accompanied by other changes like loss of bone matter, increased body weight, etc. The structure of an ovum. The human egg or ova is very small, only about 0.15 millimeter in diameter. It is non-motile and alacethal, that is almost without any yolk. The yolk is negligible because it gets implanted within about 7 to 8 days after fertilization in the uterus and draws the nourishment from the mother through the placenta. The human egg or ova at ovulation is at the secondary oocyte stage. The secondary oocyte contains a haploid nucleus and large amount of cytoplasm, and the ova is surrounded by radiating rows of follicle cells called corona radiata, forming a dense crown. Let's see this diagram here. So now first we need to go for the entire diameter of this ovum. So in this diagram, where is this ovum? So this layer, innermost layer is the outer wall is the outer wall of this one is the ovum. This is the ovum, and this ovum size is around 0. It is about 0.15 millimeters in diameter. Now, and this ovum is non-motile, immovable, and it is alecital. That means there is a lack of yolk. Just now in differences, we said that it consists reserve food material. So almost without any yolk, almost that means some maybe little amount may present. And why it is a lecital? That answer we will get here, because it consists a negligible amount of yolk, because the fertilized egg is implanted within 7 to 8 days. That's why the reserve food content is negligible in the egg or maybe ova. So after fertilization, it will implanted. The fertilized egg is implanted on uterus endometrium, that is 7 to 8 days, and from implantation it starts to gets the nutrients from the mother through the placenta. Now, in humans, the egg or ova at ovulation, and it releases from the Graafian follicle. It is in secondary oocyte stage. That means it does not converted into ova when it is released from the follicle. And this secondary oocyte consists a large amount of cytoplasm and a nucleus, haploid nucleus. And now come to this. This secondary oocyte contains a radiating rows of follicle cells. These are the radiating cells. These are all outside. These cells are called as corona radiata cells, which are formed as the crown on the secondary oocyte.